everybody, welcome back. We have a video here from Charles Hoskinson, the man himself. So this is why I like Cardano. With like real leadership like this, somebody who gives a crap, like this is why I respect Cardano. And this is a little video. Check it out. What do you think? Leave some comments, spread the word, because what he's saying is pretty true. Somebody has to be held accountable, right? The lies by the entities, these big corporations, the lies they told, the censoring that they did, it's not right. And they took away from the bottom people and everything got put back into the top. That's what happened during this past couple of years. So check out the video. Hope you like it. Charles Hoskinson, the man speaking. Let's get into it.
Hi, everybody. This is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. So I want to make a video today to talk about something that is unrelated to cryptocurrencies, but related to our industry in a bit with the broader topic of destruction of trust in institutions. So many of you know that I'm a bit skeptical at times about the things my government, the U.S. government, talks about and claims and asserts, especially when those things have significant geopolitical importance. There is nothing that's happened in my lifetime more significant than COVID-19. And the reason being is that this was the first time in my lifetime, and actually almost everyone living's lifetime, that all of our society was shut down. And it's had very real and significant impacts on everyone. For example, where my clinic is at, we're building in Gillette, Wyoming. Town of Gillette is trying to build a bridge, and the original budget pre-COVID was $18 million. Same bridge, same materials, same firms have bid now $30 million for the project that was delayed because of inflation. It's felt everywhere in the United States. Our supply chains were wrecked, people were forced to be at home, and society was deeply divided. At the time when COVID came out, many people labeled COVID coming from a lab origin, as a conspiracy theory. Now, years later, not only is it not labeled a conspiracy theory, but now we have the director of the FBI, the Department of Energy, and now most recently, the CDC director, who was the CDC director at the time, say that they believe a lab leak is the most probable or certainly a origin of consideration. Why is this relevant and why should we care? So let me share my screen. Here's why I care. When you look at this list right here of U.S. military casualties in the last 12 wars that we've had, from the American Civil War, ranked in order of lethality, to the Spanish-American War, and you sum up all these numbers here, 855,000, down the line, you add them all up, you get about 1.3 million people. Go to Google. Our death toll of Americans who died from COVID, 1.1 million people. It's in the same order of magnitude over the last 3 years of people who have died from COVID. 103 million people have been impacted. We see patients all the time at the clinic who are permanently disabled with long COVID as a result of this. And 1.1 million people died, which is in the same order of magnitude. It's comparable to every armed conflict in the entire history of the United States. Deaths. The Civil War, World War II, World War I, Vietnam, Korea, the Revolutionary War, the War of 1812, the Mexican-American War, the Iraq War, the Philippine-American War, the War in Afghanistan, and the Spanish-American War. So we've all, in the last few years, been through an event that's killed more Americans, or in the same order of magnitude of Americans, as all of these conflicts combined. You'd ask yourself, well, shouldn't the origins matter then? Because we don't want this to happen again. This guy is a Biden-appointed FBI director, not a Republican, Biden-appointed. Says the Bureau assessment on CNN, for you people who live on that side of the political spectrum, that COVID-19 likely resulted from a lab incident. Why is the FBI credible? Because the FBI has access to signals intelligence of the United States. They know the emails and messages and other things and can conduct very complex investigations. They were given these capabilities during the war on terrorism. They have not given them back. Not only is this a harrowing thing, we kind of know what happened. There's a great book from Matt Ridley Annalena Chan from MIT, and Matt's a journalist, talks about the origins of COVID. Read it recently, and it's a wonderful outline that starts from the cave that probably the genetic sample was inspired from, collected by this woman. And there's a great, lovely article here from MIT Technology Review. Talks about the cave they likely got the virus from and the 5 people that died in that cave in 2012. Okay. And then what's the blueprint for COVID? Well, here's the DARPA proposal for the blueprint for COVID, written by EcoHealth Alliance, proposed using money from DARPA. $14 million is what they asked for. And basically, if you read the document, it wasn't approved by DARPA, but one of the people listed here is from the Wuhan Institute of Virology to collect the samples, which she had been doing at the time of this proposal for over 6 years. Then you have this right here. Now, I know you people on the left, the minute you see Marjorie Taylor Greene, you say, well, it's just all false, it's all a lie. Well, ignore her. She doesn't exist. Dr. Redfield was the director of the CDC, the organization that you guys were very comfortable deplatforming people if they said something. And he led that organization. More importantly, he's also a trained virologist. And he basically says in February of 2020, his exact words, the virus looks engineered, and gave specific reasons why. And then when people were meeting at NIH, WHO, he was excluded from the meetings to have conversations with them about what they should do next. He's the head of the CDC. That's a fact. It's happened. Right here's his testimony. And again, it killed in the same order of magnitude more Americans, the same level of Americans as every war in U.S. history combined. Why does this matter? Because this person's not under investigation. This lab is not under investigation. The whole process of gain of function is not under investigation. As it stands today, right here, right now, there are hundreds of facilities throughout the world that are conducting research on pandemic-causing diseases with very little oversight. And we live in such a partisan culture that even though the FBI says, well, this probably did come from a lab, and the people who deny that are the people who probably had a financial connection to it, and the people who are supposed to keep us safe from these pandemics were excluded from the conversations. There is no government investigation. There is no special prosecutor, even though more than 1 million Americans died. Right there. Trust Google's numbers. More than 1 million Americans died. Books have been written that give credible cases. Documents for proposals were written and submitted to DARPA to talk about how they would go about building something like this. You have the scientist who probably did it and the lab who probably did it. By the way, China denied access to all these things. We weren't allowed to come in. The last coronavirus pandemic in 2003, we were, and WHO was. This time around, we're not. There was a Senate report written by the Senate that said, again, the lab leak is a credible origin. Shouldn't we as a society, given that 1 million Americans died, demand that there be an independent, bipartisan, objective investigation done? Shouldn't we as a society audit the finances of the NIH, the CDC, and other organizations, and just be very careful and sure about where their grant money is going? And shouldn't we as a society proactively have a conversation about gain of function research? 1 million Americans died. September 11th caused a fundamental change in the entire foreign policy of the United States, the military of the United States, and defined an entire generation of war, costing our country trillions of dollars. The death toll was around 3,000. 3,000. This is 3,000 times worse in terms of American death. And we're saying we just need to move on. I'm sorry, I'm never going to do that, ever. Why? Because these institutions do not have trust. When you have the former director of the CDC, who was leading the CDC at the time, saying a meeting he should have been in, he was excluded, but the World Health Organization and non-American organization was included to discuss the origins of COVID. And they allowed a paper to be shadow written by the people there and then published under other names to say it's a conspiracy theory. And then 3 years later, the FBI, the Department of Energy, the US Senate, and other institutions come and say it's a probable thing. And we banned people from being able to express that opinion back in 2020. And we say there's no need for an investigation. There's no need for forensic accounting. There's no need for changing our policy about pandemics. Here's the reality. The amount of people it takes to make a pandemic causing agent is shrinking. You go from thousands to hundreds to dozens. The amount of people who do this kind of research and institutions that do this research is increasing. And the lethality and infectiousness of these diseases is improving. COVID, whether you believe it's natural and zoonotic, which doesn't really make any sense, but okay, you could believe it because you've been propagandized, fine, is the beginning of a trend. And if we're not careful, a small group of people with malicious intent could create something which could kill a third of all humanity. What would that do to society? The mortality rate was 1% for COVID in the United States. 1%. Could you imagine the social consequences of 30%, the inflation of 30%, the devastation of 30%? How do you avoid that and prevent that? You have to trust institutions. And right now, the institutions that are supposed to avoid that are not credible. It's very clear. So I appreciate and understand your politics may be in a certain position, but you really need to take a step back from the programming and realize this is not a partisan issue at all. The last 12 wars of the United States were not exactly partisan issues. And if something kills as many people as that, we have to short circuit the programming and ask ourselves, what do we want to accomplish moving forward? There need to be special prosecutors, there needs to be forensic accounting, and there needs to be deep investigations, which are bipartisan and independent, into the origins and the response, and ultimately the policy moving forward for COVID. I will continue to finance and advocate for this by giving money to politicians who push these things. I will continue to talk about these things with whatever microphone I'm given, because this nearly broke and destroyed America. It was devastating. It was the largest wealth transfer in American history, from the small businesses and small actors to the large businesses and large actors. It was a massive affront to our civil liberties. It was a destroyed credibility in everything from medicine to institutions. And none of those wounds are healed. And we have half of America that seems to think that that's okay, and everybody should just grow up and move on. You don't grow up and move on when 1 million people die and nobody asks why, and how do we avoid that from happening again? You don't grow up and move on when the people who were leading us during that time, who should have had a right to know, say that they were excluded, even though it was their job to be included. And transnational organizations were engaged in a cover-up. It's just that simple. This is a hill to die on. It's an issue that's incredibly important. It's an issue we should all care about, regardless of our politics. And by the way, it's just common sense, if you really think about it. Think about your personal impact of how the last 3 years have impacted you, your family, your career, your ability to travel, your plans, people you know. Some people listening to this know people were personally impacted by this. Don't you think that we have a right to know with certainty about these things? Or if you've already made up your mind, and everybody's a conspiracy theorist, okay, then you tell me, why wouldn't these people want to have independent investigations? Because obviously, if the answer is so clear, it would vindicate them in their names. Why wouldn't they want to have forensic accounting to prove beyond a certain doubt that we do not finance gain-of-function research in foreign labs? Why wouldn't they want to create a paper trail demonstrating innocence? It's because they know that if they look into these things, they're going to find out that they're not innocent. And if we don't expose it, why should we assume that the behavior is going to change? And if they get away with killing 1 million people, then why should we assume that it won't be 10 next time, or 20, or 30, and end us all? We're playing with fire. This is the equivalent of a nuclear bomb going off in New York City and claiming it was a natural phenomena and we should just all move on and not look into how that happened. Literally the equivalent of it. Would you feel comfortable with that? And all the harm and heartache and tragedy? We owe it to our people to be better. And it starts with each and every one of us not taking the bullshit crammed down our throats and demanding independent, bipartisan, fair investigations and voting with our feet. If they don't do it, vote the people out, put people in who will. This is not a partisan issue. It's a million Americans. You should care too. Thank you.